Right now, your smartphone's algorithm is like quietly casting a vote on the future of the United States.
Yeah, it really is.
And I mean, according to this totally fascinating stack of scenario analyses we're looking at today for this deep dive, it is steering us toward one of three highly specific futures. So, welcome to the deep dive, by the way. I'm so glad you're joining us. But think about it like this. You know how when you look at a forecast for a major hurricane, you don't just see one single definitive line on the map.
Right. You get that massive cone of uncertainty.
Exactly. It branches out into a few different paths based on, the pressure systems, the water temperature, the wind.
Hmm.
You're not looking at a crystal ball here. You're looking at structured, systemic models of what could happen depending on the variables that are at play.
Yeah, and the meteorologists are basically giving you boundaries. Like they show you the extreme edge of the storm, the middle path, and the trajectory if certain countervailing forces actually manage to push the storm out to sea. And we're going to use these models today as a comparative framework. We want to look at where highly complex societies are heading. And honestly, more importantly, we're looking at the hidden mechanisms that are actually driving them there.
So we are taking that exact concept and applying it to the future of the United States. The models in our sources introduce three conceptual codes to map out these trajectories. We've got objective 0, 0, objective 1, 0, and objective 0, 1.
That should sound like math homework, I know.
Yeah, a little bit. Let's decode these names early on so we all have a shared map. Think of them like coordinates on a graph. So the x-axis, that represents concentrated technological and economic power.
Right.
And the y-axis represents public participation and democratic control.
Which means the ultimate hinge point for which trajectory the society takes comes down to, well, one crucial variable, and that's your participation.
Exactly. Does the public actually engage?
Do they vote? Do they demand system changes? Or do they just passively allow massive technological and economic forces to, take the wheel? Because navigating a highly complex, technologically advanced society on autopilot that carries some very severe, mathematically predictable risks.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with the most extreme boundary of our framework, like the absolute worst case scenario. The models call this objective 0, 0.
Yeah, 0 and 0.
Right. That means zero system resilience, zero public participation.
So objective 0, 0 is defined as a terminal scenario, basically systemic collapse. But what is vital to understand here is the actual mechanism of that collapse. It's never a Hollywood movie where one single catastrophic explosion just ends the world overnight.
Right. There's no dramatic countdown clock.
Exactly. It is a story of highly interconnected and vulnerable systems suffering cascading failures. And why? Because they completely lack the slack to absorb a shock.
It's like the ultimate paradox of modern civilization, really. We have essentially traded resilience for extreme efficiency. I kind of think about it like an old, heavily interconnected electrical grid.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, like if one tree falls on a power line in Ohio, suddenly half the eastern seaboard is in the dark.
Right.
Why? Because of system interdependence. You literally lack redundancy. Every single node is leaning so heavily on the next node just to save costs and maximize output that when one snaps, the whole line goes down.
Domino effect.
Exactly. In the 1,000 scenario, our global supply chains, our financial networks, our communication grids, they are that power line in Ohio.
And when you map out the specific drivers from the text that push a society toward this 0, 0, 0 state, it always begins with an underlying foundation of severe stress. It starts with a phase they call tension accumulation.
Right, which we see plenty of.
Oh, absolutely. You have geopolitical tension, where major powers are competing over influence, which leads to a massive decline in international trust. Then you have resource stress, intense, localized competition over basic necessities like water, food, energy.
Yeah.
Then you layer on information breakdown, where deepfakes, misinformation, or targeted cyber attacks actively blind decision makers to reality. This is the localized disruption phase.
But the driver that fundamentally accelerates all of this into, truly dangerous territory is advanced technology. The idea that AI and automated cyber systems actually reduce human decision-making time to incredibly dangerous levels.
Yeah, and let's play out a 60-second micro story to see how that actually functions in practice.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine a localized, simmering dispute over water rights in a drought-stricken region, and it involves multiple international actors. In the past, if an incident occurred, say a dam was suddenly closed off, leaders might have days, maybe weeks to gather intelligence, dispatch diplomats, verify the facts on the ground, and just, negotiate.
Right, there is a buffer zone for human friction. You have time to breathe.
But today, what if an autonomous, AI-driven cyber defense system misinterprets a totally routine software patch at a regional water facility as a sophisticated offensive maneuver by a foreign adversary?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the system is programmed to neutralize threats instantly to prevent critical infrastructure loss, right? So it immediately launches a retaliatory cyber strike against the perceived adversary's payment processing hub
Without asking anyone.
without asking.
Hmm.
The window for human intervention shrinks from weeks down to mere minutes.
And because of that massive interconnectedness we talked about, shutting down the payment hub freezes the supply chain.
Exactly.
Trucks carrying food stop moving because they literally can't process fuel payments. Grocery store shelves empty out within 48 hours. Panic sets in, leading to civil unrest, which overloads the medical system. You have this massive system strain and then cascading failures initiated by an algorithmic miscalculation.
And human leaders are just moving way too slowly to catch the falling dominoes. The final phase is simply a breakdown of institutional control. The pressure on the critical infrastructure is so immense and sustained that the systems governing society just buckle.
Which is absolutely terrifying to conceptualize.
It is. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, Objective 1000 is placed in this framework as a boundary condition. It acts as a reminder that progress isn't guaranteed. It's not an inevitable law of physics.
Fortunately.
Very fortunately. Because there are massive breaks built into our current world order against this outcome. Mutual deterrence, economic interdependence, diplomatic frameworks, and just the public's inherent preference for baseline stability. They all act as massive counterweights. Nobody rationally wants a terminal scenario, so enormous amounts of capital and political will are spent keeping us out of 1000.
But if mutual destruction and our desire for stability keep us from hitting 0-0, we don't just stay stagnant. A complex society is always in motion. If we avoid total collapse, but we don't actively participate in our governance, like if we stop voting, stop caring, and just let the momentum carry us, we drift. We drift right into the second scenario. Objective 1 over.
Yeah, Objective 1 Velar is the cautionary trajectory. Remember our coordinates. This is a 1 for maximum concentration of technological power and a 0 for public participation.
Right, a very lopsided graph.
Exactly. It is a scenario where technological scale, economic incentives, and policy environments all naturally align to consolidate wealth and influence into an exceptionally small segment of society.
And the mechanism here isn't some cartoon villain in a boardroom plotting to enslave the masses. It happens through passive system drift.
That is the most insidious aspect of it, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
It is driven by the highly irrational, logical behaviors of dominant actors functioning within a capitalist and technological framework.
Yeah.
Companies want to be more efficient, so they develop advanced AI and automate labor. They want to provide hyper-personalized services, so they ingest and centralize massive amounts of behavioral data. Over time, ownership of that underlying technological infrastructure becomes the absolute primary determinant of economic advantage.
And while that consolidation happens at the top, the middle class experiences this brutal, slow-motion erosion. You have wage stagnation happening on one side and highly capable automation displacing traditional white-collar and blue-collar jobs on the other.
And as that wealth and data consolidate, the policy and regulatory environments are effectively captured. The legislative frameworks begin to heavily reflect the interests of that dominant group. Institutional checks and balances just slowly weaken under the weight of concentrated influence.
There's a fascinating phase in this progression detailed in the sources called soft constraint. It's not a dictatorship where your rights are officially revoked by a military tribunal. You still have formal legal freedoms on paper.
Right, you can still go to the store.
You can still vote in elections, you can still buy the products you want, but in practice, upward mobility is mathematically nearly impossible. Your practical autonomy is incredibly limited by pervasive surveillance and relentless economic pressure.
You are technically free, but your choices are entirely curated and constrained by algorithmic systems you do not control and likely barely even understand.
I think of it like bowling with the bumpers up. But the bumpers are subtly guiding your ball away from the pins while a flashing screen tells you you're a world-class bowler.
That is a great analogy.
You feel totally autonomous in the moment, but your trajectory was quietly decided for you before you even let go of the ball.
And the fragmentation of shared reality plays a massive role in maintaining those bumpers. If everyone is living in their own bespoke, algorithmically generated reality, collective action becomes almost impossible. You cannot organize a public pushback against wage stagnation or data privacy violations if the public cannot even agree on basic fundamental facts because their news feeds are totally different.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to push back on this premise just a little.
Definitely.
The models place a lot of the blame on algorithms for this passive drift. But isn't it just human nature to seek out echo chambers? Like, we like people who agree with us. We are naturally drawn to tribalism and outrage. Can we really blame a line of code for the fact that people would rather watch a controversial, emotionally charged hot take than read a nuanced 30-page policy paper?
That's a fair point, and human psychology is absolutely the raw material. But the algorithms are the industrial refinery.
Okay, I see.
Yes, human beings have cognitive biases. We
Yeah.
prefer information that validates our pre-existing beliefs. But historically, finding that highly specific validating information required effort. What the algorithm does is optimize for that exact friction. It actively designs the environment to feed those biases continuously because outrage and tribalism generate the highest engagement metrics.
Right.
And high engagement metrics generate the most advertising revenue.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, it's not that someone explicitly takes away your right to vote or participate, but the algorithms shaping the information you consume are quietly optimizing for engagement and bias, making you wildly susceptible to manipulation.
So it's a velvet prison built out of our own psychological blind spots.
Exactly. The algorithm didn't invent human bias, but it weaponized it at a planetary scale to serve an economic imperative. And that brings us to the core tension of the entire framework. Objective 1.0 is highly susceptible to countervailing forces, but those forces require active public pushback,
Meaning you and me.
meaning all of us. We are talking about strict antitrust regulation, demanding rigorous data privacy transparency, and a push toward technological decentralization like open source systems.
Which means getting out and voting. It means demanding that your representatives actually understand the technology they are supposed to be regulating. If 1.0 is what happens when we go on autopilot, what does the system look like if the public actively grabs the wheel? What if we demand transparency and vote for a fundamentally different trajectory?
Well, that leads us to the final coordinate in our map, Objective 0.1.
Which I'm actually really excited to talk about. Objective 0.1 is the constructive trajectory, a 0 for centralized technological monopoly, and a 1 for maximum democratic participation.
Yes, and the key word here is that it is an intentionally designed scenario.
Right. It completely flips the script on the technologies driving that passive drift we just talked about. Instead of AI and big data being used to consolidate power at the top, in 0.1, those exact same tools are leveraged to distribute power, strengthen democratic institutions, and create radical transparency.
And the specific mechanisms of development here rely on intentional alignment rather than just, passive optimization. For example, consider education. Instead of elite education becoming increasingly exclusive, AI-assisted personalized learning platforms are deployed as a public utility to massively expand educational access across all socioeconomic backgrounds.
Wow.
The barrier to entry for highly complex knowledge-based fields drops dramatically.
So what does an algorithmic reorientation actually look like for someone just sitting there holding their phone? Does it just force you to eat your digital vegetables and read boring academic journals?
Not exactly, but it fundamentally shifts the incentive structure of the platform. Instead of opening a news app and seeing 5 articles carefully curated to make you furious at an opposing political party, an algorithmic reorientation means your feed intentionally mixes in highly rated, nuanced essays from moderates on both sides of an issue.
Okay, so it breaks the echo chamber.
Right. The system is programmed to optimize for user understanding, diverse exposure, and constructive discourse, rather than just raw emotional engagement.
It actively works to reduce polarization by broadening the lens, but the biggest shift in this model is how democracy itself functions. It introduces continuous democratic feedback. It is no longer just a system where you show up to a local high school gymnasium to fill in a bubble every 2 or 4 years.
Exactly. Robust digital infrastructure is put in place for ongoing, secure public input. Institutional decision-making becomes totally visible. If a city council is debating a zoning law, the data modeling the impacts of that law is open source and available to the public in real time.
That's incredibly.
It's a multi-layered oversight structure where the government, the technological systems, and a highly engaged public form a modernized, continuous system of checks and balances. Power becomes inherently distributed because access to verifiable information is distributed.
I want to dig into a very specific mechanism in the 0-1 scenario that we absolutely have to dissect. It's called ethical economic integration. The concept is that as automation takes over routine, repetitive tasks, human labor shifts toward roles requiring complex judgment, empathy, and creativity.
Right, the things AI can't do.
Exactly. But the economic system itself begins incorporating non-material metrics into how value is assigned. Things like trust, community reputation, and ethical behavior.
Yes, supplementary value indicators emerge alongside traditional currency. The incentives expand beyond just pure financial profit to include a quantifiable measure of your actual social contribution. They refer to these as something akin to Samaritan points.
Okay, wait. I hear supplementary value indicators and Samaritan points, and red alarm bells immediately start ringing in my head.
I don't blame you.
While that sounds great in theory, couldn't quantifying ethical behavior easily turn into a terrifying dystopian social credit score? Like, who gets to define what constitutes ethical behavior? How do we balance a system that measures your morality without it becoming an incredibly oppressive surveillance state?
This raises an important question, and the sources actually validate your concern perfectly. The models do not present Objective 01 as a flawless utopia. They explicitly warn about the exact trade-off you are highlighting. They define this risk as moral quantification bias.
Right.
Any system that attempts to measure and reward ethical behavior is highly vulnerable to manipulation. The metrics will inherently reflect the cultural and political biases of whoever designs the algorithm.
Because one group's definition of ethical community service might be another group's definition of moral overreach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Furthermore, to achieve the radical transparency required to make 0-1 function, a society inherently loses a massive amount of personal privacy. If institutional decisions and individual social contributions are constantly visible to ensure accountability, the dividing line between public responsibility and invasive private surveillance gets incredibly blurry.
The models mention something else that feels incredibly relatable for anyone who has ever served on a homeowners association board or like a local committee. Participation fatigue.
Oh yeah. Continuous engagement is practically exhausting. If you have to vote on micro issues, provide continuous feedback on community data models, and monitor local and national decisions constantly just to keep the system balanced, it can deeply overwhelm the individual.
That is the harsh reality check of 0-1.
Uh,
It isn't a magical finish line where society solves all its problems and we sail into the sunset. It is a high-maintenance engine. It requires exhausting, sustained, deliberate coordination. It requires a resilient culture that deeply reinforces norms of accountability and civic duty.
Because if the public gets tired and stops participating, the system just naturally collapses backward into the passive drift of 1-0.
Right.
And that really brings us to the ultimate synthesis of these frameworks. Looking realistically at the trajectory of the United States, or really any highly complex modern society, we are not going to land perfectly on the precise coordinates of 0001001.
No, we are going to experience a deeply fractured hybrid. You might have one sector of the economy, let's say open source software development, that operates very much like 0-1. It is highly collaborative, radically transparent, and power is distributed among thousands of contributors.
Right.
But right next door, you might have another sector like digital advertising or data brokerage that is deeply entrenched in the soft constraints of one rule, operating with zero transparency and massive consolidation.
Exactly. The profound value of examining these scenario models isn't in trying to pick one future as a guaranteed destiny. It's not fortune-telling. It is in clarifying the stakes of the present moment. The trajectory a complex system takes depends entirely on the strength of its countervailing forces.
Yeah.
If the natural economic gravity of our era pulls us reliably toward the centralized concentration of 130, then the required countervailing force has to be the public.
Meaning the countervailing force has to be you.
Your active awareness of how your data is monetized, your vocal demand for transparent algorithmic governance, and most importantly, your vote. These are the literal mechanical levers that pull the societal system away from systemic collapse or oligarchical concentration and steer it toward distributed accountability.
It fundamentally comes down to choosing whether you want to be an active participant in the architectural design of the system, or just a passive consumer of whatever outcome the system generates for you.
These objectives do not define the future. They frame the boundaries of what is possible. They illuminate the unseen currents beneath the surface so we can understand why the water is moving the way it is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering question to mull over on your own. Something that builds on the mechanics we've discussed today, but applies directly to your life the moment you take your headphones off.
Okay.
If our future is indeed going to be a messy hybrid of these models, consider your own life right now. Take a hard, critical look at your own digital ecosystem. Are there platforms you rely on every single day that are already operating under the soft constraints of Objective 1Y? Spaces where your choices are quietly curated, your attention is harvested for outrage, and your data is centralized.
Likely yes.
And if you identify those spaces, what is one small, deliberate act of participation you could take tomorrow to push your personal corner of the world just a little bit closer to the transparency and distributed power of 0-1?
It is the most vital question you can ask yourself,
Mm.
because the systemic storm is always moving, and passive drift is a choice in itself.
Just like staring at the cone of uncertainty in a hurricane forecast, the path only narrows when we finally decide which way we are going to steer the ship.